I am 80 years old now. I sit in this silence every evening, and the only noise I hear is the constant screaming of a mistake I made half a century ago. They say hindsight is 20/20. For me, it is a blinding flash of misery. I didn't just waste my life. I wasted my children's understanding of what happiness looks like. I stayed with Charles because I thought I was protecting Patricia and James. I believed that two miserable parents were better than one happy divorced mother. That lie was the foundation of my entire existence for 40 years. I sacrificed Frederick, the kindest man I ever knew, for stability. I traded sunshine for a perpetual drizzle. Now I have stability, but I taught my babies that love feels cold and that commitment means quiet suffering. That is the true tragedy of my life. Charles was never cruel. That is what made it so hard to leave. He was just absent, an emotional ghost in our very large house. We lived parallel lives, sharing a bed but never a dream. We talked about bills and chores and upcoming holidays, never about what truly moved us. I tried to manufacture warmth, especially when the children were small. I would hold his hand at the dinner table and look at him with a forced smile, but my soul was miles away. It was always in that little coffee shop where I first met Frederick. My whole world became a performance of conventional married bliss, a terrible play with no applause, only the muffled sobs I kept hidden deep inside my pillow at night. I didn't know how to stop acting. Frederick was electricity. He saw the potential in me that Charles only tolerated. I remember the smell of his cologne and the way his hands felt when he explained his architecture projects. He was vibrant. He wanted to build a future with me that felt alive. We had plans, small, stupid plans about moving to the coast and opening a gallery. I was 22 years old and felt infinite. I felt seen. But my parents, my stupid, conventional parents, insisted that Charles offered security. They said Frederick was a dreamer, too flighty, too risky. Security. What a worthless word that turned out to be. Frederick was everything my heart needed. I chose a mortgage over magic. I chose the fear of gossip over authentic joy. That choice burns me still. The last time I saw Frederick was in a park near the harbor. It was raining slightly. He held an umbrella and his eyes were already full of resignation, almost pity. I remember telling him I had chosen Charles. I used words like responsible and sensible and family. Frederick just looked at me and said, "Doris, you are choosing to kill your own spirit. You think this is strength, but it is cowardice." That word cowardice shattered me, but I still got into Charles's car and drove away. I never looked back. I was too ashamed. Too afraid that if I saw Frederick's face one last time, my resolve would crumble, and I would have to face the truth that my life was being stolen by my own hand. It was the deepest betrayal of myself. The first 10 years were a slow suffocation. I kept waiting for the deep love to appear, the kind of love they write about in novels, the kind I felt effortlessly with Frederick. It never came. I became preoccupied with cleanliness, with order, with routine. Anything to distract from the emptiness inside the walls. I poured all my energy into James and Patricia. I was the perfect mother, the one who always baked the cookies and signed up for every PTA meeting. But I was resentful. My energy was a mask. I started snapping at Charles over trivial things, the toothpaste cap, the misplaced keys. I wasn't fighting him. I was fighting the ghost of Frederick and the crushing weight of my own regret every single day. Children are sponges. They absorb the unspoken atmosphere of the home. They never saw us hug spontaneously. They never heard us laugh together genuinely. They heard silence, and they heard polite arguments about money. They normalized that emptiness. Patricia, my sweet daughter, she grew up to be meticulous and anxious, always striving for perfection, but terrified of intimacy. James married a woman who frankly treats him like a child, controlling every aspect of his life. I saw these patterns and finally understood the horrifying lesson I had taught them. I showed them that marriage is a duty you endure quietly, that passion is dangerous, and that true affection is found only outside the home, if at all. I poisoned their expectations. When the children left for college, the silence became unbearable. Charles and I were just two strangers sharing a utility bill. I seriously considered leaving him then, running away to find Frederick, even if it was decades late. I looked him up. He was living on the West Coast, married with 2 grown sons. He was happy. A part of me died that day. The last shard of hope, the fantasy that he was waiting for me, dissolved into ash. I realized my mistake was not just choosing Charles over Frederick. My mistake was thinking Frederick was a waiting option, a lifeboat, instead of a life I should have fought for fiercely. I was selfish enough to want his misery to validate my own sacrifice. Charles died 6 years ago, quietly in his sleep. When the doctor pronounced him gone, I felt a deep, terrible relief, immediately followed by profound guilt. I hadn't loved him the way a wife should, and I worried my emotional withdrawal had contributed to his lonely heart. I cried at his funeral, of course, mostly for the 2 of us who never managed to connect, but I felt no sense of true loss, only emptiness. I was finally free, but free into a house full of memories of manufactured happiness. The freedom I had earned was too late to use. I was 74 years old, suddenly alone, but the real loneliness had started 50 years earlier, when I said I do to the wrong man in front of 100 smiling witnesses. The true mourning was for my youth. Now my children call regularly, out of duty. I see the same weariness in Patricia's eyes that I carried for decades. I listen to James complain about his wife, and I see a mirror of my own history. They learned my pattern. They are enduring, not living. They are waiting for happiness to fall into their laps, just as I waited for Charles to transform into Frederick. I want to shake them. I want to scream at them, to run, to choose the radical joy, to tear down the walls of expectation I helped build. But how can I preach liberation when I spent my whole life in a self-imposed prison? I can only watch them repeat the misery I mistakenly called commitment. It is the punishment for my own lack of courage. I wasted 40 years, not just in a bad marriage, but in teaching a destructive philosophy to the 2 people I loved most. I taught them that sacrifice is noble, even when that sacrifice costs your soul. I taught them that misery is the price of stability. I convinced myself that staying together for their sakes was the ultimate act of parental love. It was the ultimate act of parental cruelty. If I could rewind time, I would have faced the shame of divorce. I would have faced the temporary hurt, the gossip, the financial instability, just so my children could grow up seeing true, uninhibited love between their parents. That visibility is the most important inheritance we can ever give them. I stole that from them. Sometimes I close my eyes and I can see the life I should have had. Frederick and I, older now, still laughing over the silly jokes we had when we were 20. I see a coastal townhouse full of sunlight and books. I imagine children who grew up seeing their parents kiss without obligation. Children who understood that passion is essential, not optional. That parallel life mocks me. It is so vivid, so clearly the better path. I realize now that security is an illusion. The only real security comes from being utterly true to yourself. Because if you aren't, the consequences will ripple out and destroy the people you intended to protect the most. I should have been brave. Regret is not a sharp, momentary pain. It is a dull, relentless ache that lives in your bones. It sits beside me at every meal and sleeps at the foot of my bed. It is the realization that the time is gone, absolutely, irrevocably gone. You cannot get 40 years back. You cannot apologize to the younger version of yourself who desperately needed a champion. I look in the mirror and I see an old woman whose eyes still carry the ghost of a young girl who made one bad decision based on fear, and then spent 4 decades rigorously defending that error. That is the burden of age. The mistakes don't fade. They become sharper, clearer, because the possibility of correcting them has vanished completely. I still have one small, grainy photograph of Frederick. I keep it tucked away in an old jewelry box, hidden beneath meaningless pearls. I pull it out perhaps once a year, usually on Christmas Eve, when the weight of enforced cheer becomes too much. He looks so hopeful in that picture. His smile is genuine. I stare at it and I try to remember what it felt like to be loved properly, the way he loved me. It is like trying to recall a scent from a garden that burned down years ago. The memory is fading, but the consequences of losing him are permanent and fresh, a gaping wound that never healed. I keep it hidden because the children must never know the depth of my failure. If you are young and watching this, please listen to my exhausted voice. Do not confuse comfort with love. Do not let external expectations dictate your internal world. The fear of being alone, the fear of disappointing your parents, the fear of poverty, none of that is worth the price of your genuine happiness. Financial ruin can be fixed. Reputations can be rebuilt. But your 20s, your 30s, your vital, energetic middle age, that time is finite. If you know in your heart you are walking down the wrong aisle, turn around. It is an excruciating moment of truth, but it is nothing compared to the 40-year torture of waking up next to someone who is fundamentally incompatible with your soul. Be brave enough to choose joy now. My only hope now is that my grandchildren break the cycle. I am trying subtly to influence them. I tell them stories about bold choices, about taking risks, about chasing adventure. I try to be the rebellious grandmother I never was allowed to be. But the damage is done. Patricia and James are modeling my misery. They see me, a widow, still adhering to impossible standards of social conduct and enduring quiet solitude. They believe this is how life ends. I pray that they wake up before they are 80 and look back only to see the joy they allowed to escape. I pray they choose the Frederick in their lives, no matter how chaotic or uncertain that path might seem. I cannot blame Charles. I cannot blame my parents. They offered advice based on their own limited perspectives. The final decision was mine, and mine alone. I was the captain of the ship, and I steered it directly into the fog. I was the one who prioritized societal approval over genuine human connection. I was the coward. That is the harshest word I have learned in my old age. Not that I was wrong, but that I lacked the fundamental courage required to live an honest life. I was afraid of being judged as the girl who didn't settle. Instead, I became the woman who settled for a life built entirely on sand. The tide finally came in and washed it all away. I live in a beautiful house, filled with expensive antiques and portraits of a family that looks happy. But it is a gilded cage. Every room echoes with the silence of the unsaid words, the unshared dreams. I walk through these halls and I feel like an interloper, a guest in my own life. I never created a home. I built a monument to conventional success. When I look out the window at night, I sometimes imagine I see Frederick's shadow across the street, laughing at the folly of my choice. He is not there, of course. But the idea of him, the potential happiness I extinguished, haunts this place far more thoroughly than any ghost could. I remember speaking to Patricia recently. She was arguing with her own husband about nothing important, just a familiar, low-grade tension. She hung up and said, "Mom, this is just what marriage is, right? You just endure it." When she said that, I broke inside. I saw myself at her age saying the exact same thing, convincing myself that enduring was loving. I wanted to tell her the truth, to confess everything, to warn her off that miserable path. But the words stuck in my throat. I couldn't shatter the carefully constructed image of my perfect, sacrificing motherhood. I realized that my legacy is not the love I tried to show, but the misery I normalized. And I am powerless to undo it. Do not stay for the children. That phrase is a lie used by frightened adults. The children need you to model happiness, not stability. They need to see you choose love over convenience. They need to learn that an honest life, even a messy one, is always superior to a lie wrapped in respectability. If you teach them that love feels like obligation and that joy is selfish, you are damning their own futures. You are teaching them to kill their own spirit, just as I killed mine. The greatest gift you can give your kids is the example of a parent who is fiercely, unapologetically thriving. Please, for their sake and for yours, do not make the sacrifice I made. I look back and I see two paths diverging in a yellow wood. Robert Frost said he took the one less traveled by. I took the paved, well-maintained highway that led straight to nowhere important. I often wonder what Frederick thinks of me now. Does he pity me? Does he remember me at all? I hope he doesn't. I hope he is too busy living the full, beautiful life I was too scared to join him for. I wasted my one precious chance at real, exhilarating happiness. And the deepest tragedy is that my children paid the price for my fear. I only hope my final confession here can somehow save someone else from making my soul-crushing mistake.